Hey YouTube, today I'm going to be discussing the Nissan Frontier. This specific model is a 2007, so this is going to be a blanket video for the 2005s, the 2011s, because the 2011s, I believe they got revisions for the timing chains, and they also fixed the problem with the transmission and coolant mixing in the radiator. So mostly this video is going to pertain to your 2005, 2010, maybe 2011. I'm not exactly sure when they made the transition from the Borg-Warner timing chains and the radiator. But nonetheless, specifically what I'm going to be talking about, and this is something that I had a hard time finding information about online, on the forums mostly, is I bought this truck about a week ago. It wasn't running. Bought it as a fixer-upper, and right off the bat it would run and idle, but then it would die, have a real hard time staying alive. And so I put new spark plugs, coil packs, your average tune-up. I swapped out the valve covers so that way, because it's got the integrated valve, or the integrated oil seals on the coil pack, the housing. So you have to swap out the whole valve covers, just so that way I'd give it the best shot at running. Still having the same problems. So I ended up figuring out that the cats were clogged up, and someone had punched out the passenger side cat, because that was the side that was having the random misfire. And the codes that it was throwing, it wasn't saying anything about catalytic converter above or below threshold. So it didn't cross my mind, being a little bit reliant on my code reader, I should say. But nonetheless, ended up figuring out that the cats were clogged. Someone punched out the upstream cat, and when they did that, I don't think they properly cleaned it out, and it sent all the stuff down into the rear, because it's got the two upstream cats, the two downstream cats. So I went through and I cleaned, I actually ended up punching out the driver's side cat, just so that way they were matching on both sides, just to get it running, And I pulled the two rear cats and I ran lacquer thinner through them, and I cleaned them out as best as I could, and I reinstalled them. And then it ran great for a handful of days, and soon to follow afterwards was I was getting really bad white smoke. And I'll show you. Well, not white smoke, but bluish white, your typical oil smoke. And I'll show you what I'm meaning by that, and you'll see it's running really bad. Yeah, it's having a hard time idling. And then I don't know if you can see in the mirror, just lots of white smoke or blue smoke, and just runs terrible. And so, my initial thought is, it blew a head gasket. That makes sense. Having a clogged cat, that's a lot of heat built up in the combustion chambers. It's got nowhere to push that exhaust out to, and I was like, I can't be totally shocked by this. It makes sense. And so I checked the oil, I checked the coolant, it's all good. It doesn't overheat. And I'm like, okay, PCV valve is bad. So I changed out the PCV valve. No difference in the smoke. The only thing that made sense to me is it's down on compression. One of the piston rings are worn out, and for the mileage doesn't add up, because it's 100,000 miles. And from what I read is that these motors, granted they do have major issues, but when those issues are addressed, they have no problem making it to 200,000 miles. So I did a compression test, and I got 150 across all cylinders except for the driver's side rear, which came back at 165. So it was a 15 psi above the rest, and it didn't really raise that much concern for me, just because they're pretty consistent across the board except for the one, and I'd rather be higher in compression than lower, you know what I mean? So I start digging around on the forums, seeing what people are saying as far as excessive white smoke, and you know, these do have bad oil consumption problems. A lot of what is tied into is the PCV system, and then from what I had put together and what I had read on the forums, and granted this is, you know, information that's taken from anybody that can post on the forums, so, but it is also what makes the most sense in my situation, and I had a hard time finding information on it, so I'm just trying to pass this knowledge on to the next guy. But from my understanding, the way that this motor works with its valve timing, and especially with the variable valve timing, is that the exhaust and intake valve can hang open at the same time, and when the cat's clogged, it will create a lot of pressure in the exhaust system, and when those valves hang open, the combustion chamber is a low pressure, you know, the low pressure, and the exhaust is a high pressure, so it will scavenge the catalytic converter material that's all broken up from it being clogged, or from, you know, the previous guy punching out the cat, whatever the case may be. But it will scavenge that material back into the cylinders, and it will then it'll score the cylinder walls, and you'll get, you know, for example, heavy blue smoke. You'll get oil consumption. It won't run very well, and so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm looking at putting a motor in this truck. You know, I bought it for a good deal, so I can afford to put a motor in it because it's under Blue Book, you know, after everything's said and done. It does suck though, because it was running good for a couple of days, and it did end up, from my understanding and at least what I've put together, it scavenged the catalytic converter material back in the cylinders and shot the motor. So it's a bummer, but if you're a guy that's having a random cylinder misfire and you can't track it down between the coil packs and the plugs, and you're not exactly sure, I'd say first and foremost, get under after you've been running it for a while, you know, like, not necessarily get the temp, but get it a little hot, and go underneath it, and you'll have your left side and your right side, and you'll see that they make a Y pipe and they go together down one exhaust exit. Feel across the two sides. Now, don't burn yourself, obviously, but feel across the two sides. You'll notice a temperature difference between the two, and that'll give you an idea on if your cat's clogged. If your cat is clogged, don't do what I did. Do not punch the cats out. Just buy the aftermarket cats. They don't have the expensive material in them. They're a lot cheaper. Swap the cats out. Save yourself the hassle that I'm going through, because I was impatient and I wanted to just get it running. It's not the way to go. Make sure to just buy the aftermarket cats. And if you are going to punch the cats out because you don't care and you don't want to put the money in it, just thoroughly clean them and make sure there's no debris left in them, and make sure that it has no material that it can scavenge back into the motor, because you'll end up in my boat where you're going to have to put a motor in it. But yeah, anyways, guys, you have a good rest of your day.